On a quiet June morning in 1991, the streets of South Lake Tahoe promised nothing more sinister than the buzz of cicadas and the shuffle of school shoes. Pink cloth caught the sun, an 11-year-old girl, backpack strapped, walking the same path she always did toward the bus stop. But routine is a fragile shield. A car crept into view, gray, ordinary, forgettable, until its door opened. The silence of suburbia split with a sound neighbors will remember but never explain, something like a crack of static, followed by a scream that never finished. Within seconds, the child was gone. The road lay empty, dust settling as if nothing had passed. Her name was Jaycee Lee Dugard, and for nearly 2 decades her face stared from bulletin boards and milk cartons, another photograph waiting for closure that never came. Authorities called it a mystery. Families whispered it was hopeless. But behind one ordinary fence, beneath tarps and tents that flapped like ragged sails, she was still there, hidden in plain sight, a ghost no one believed could exist. There's something eerie about the way a child's handwriting betrays their innocence. In a diary recovered years later, Jaycee Dugard wrote about her longing for freedom with words that looked like they belonged on a spelling test rather than in the prison of her life. "I want to be with my mom," she scribbled, letters uneven, the O in mom like a balloon barely tethered to the page. But the diary wasn't found until nearly 2 decades after she vanished. Nearly 2 decades of silence, of neighbors who swore they saw nothing, of a world that somehow carried on while a girl was hidden in plain sight. The last morning she was truly free should have been utterly forgettable. June 10, 1991. A little stretch of road in South Lake Tahoe, California. Jaycee, 11 years old, walked to the school bus stop in her pink clothes, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Just another day, until it wasn't. A car pulled up beside her, a man inside, a woman in the passenger seat. The kind of tableau you wouldn't blink at until the window rolled down, until the sound of tires crunching gravel was drowned out by something that doesn't belong in the daylight. Terror. Witnesses later said they saw a girl being pulled into a car. They didn't know it was the opening act of a nightmare that would last 18 years. Her stepfather tried to chase after them on a bike, pedaling frantically, his legs burning, but the car was gone before he could even process what he'd seen. Think about that. Your entire existence, your laughter, your future birthdays, your unfinished diary entries, ripped out of the world in the span of seconds. And the scariest part? No one knew that Jaycee wasn't dead. No one knew she was alive, trapped just miles away. While her face appeared on missing child posters, while her name became just another plea on television, she was caged behind a backyard fence, her cries swallowed by suburbia's white noise of lawnmowers and barking dogs. A pink-clad girl walked to school. She never arrived, and yet she was closer than anyone dared to imagine. California in the early 1990s wasn't some haunted wasteland where danger oozed from every alley. It was supposed to be paradise. South Lake Tahoe was a postcard town. The sharp green of pine trees slicing the horizon, the sapphire shimmer of the lake, casinos buzzing just across the Nevada border. Families moved there because it felt safe, idyllic, like nothing bad could possibly happen under skies that blue. And yet, the universe has a way of hiding shadows in the brightest places. The early 90s were an anxious time, though America was lurching out of the Cold War, stumbling into recession, watching its trust in institutions erode. Parents were terrified of kidnappers, and yet no one believed it would happen to them. Daytime TV fed a steady diet of missing children's stories, their smiling faces frozen in before pictures, as if daring viewers to reconcile those smiles with the abyss that swallowed them. Jaycee Dugard's disappearance was about to become one more photograph pinned to cork boards in grocery stores, just above the lost cat flyers. South Lake Tahoe's police force wasn't built for this sort of horror. They were accustomed to bar fights, DUIs, the occasional ski theft. What they got on June 10th, 1991, was a crime that ripped their community's illusion to shreds. The missing posters went up fast. Helicopters scanned the forest. Volunteers combed the underbrush with flashlights. And yet, it was already too late. The predators had slipped through the cracks like water through a clenched fist. And the irony? This wasn't Los Angeles, with its clogged freeways and sprawling anonymity. This was a small town where people wave at each other in the market, where a missing child should have sent shockwaves so loud they rattled every window. But silence was louder than suspicion here. Everyone thought they lived in a place immune to monsters. In the weeks after Jaycee vanished, the atmosphere of South Lake Tahoe curdled. Kids weren't allowed to walk alone anymore. Mothers gripped their children's wrists until circulation cut off. Neighbors started eyeing each other, whispering, "What if it's someone we know?" The very air changed. School buses no longer meant safety. The sight of a parked van now carried the weight of threat. Beneath the picture-perfect postcard, South Lake Tahoe was becoming a town haunted by its own reflection. A place where everyone asked the same maddening question: how can a child vanish in broad daylight on a suburban street with witnesses watching? And how could the earth swallow her so completely? Before her name was dragged into headlines and missing person posters, Jaycee Lee Dugard was just a kid. She loved animals, ferrets especially, the kind of strange, quirky obsession only a child can carry with absolute seriousness. She adored her mom, Terry, clung to her like gravity itself, terrified of the distance that middle school years often stretch between parent and child. She was shy, quiet, the type who blended into background at school rather than demanded attention. In other words, she was normal, painfully, achingly normal. She lived with her mom and stepfather, Carl Probin, in a small, ordinary house. Nothing glamorous, nothing eerie, nothing cinematic, just carpeting that smelled like detergent and dinners at a kitchen table that probably wobbled on one leg. That's the part that gnaws at you. She wasn't a kid who went looking for danger. She wasn't rebellious, wasn't chasing chaos. She was an 11-year-old who wanted to go to school, maybe draw a little doodle in the margins of her notebook, maybe come home and watch TV. But predators don't care about innocence. They don't care that you're a child. They don't even care that the entire neighborhood is awake and staring. To them, your life is simply an opportunity. And to the Garridos, the couple who would soon rip Jaycee's existence into two as labeled before and after, that's exactly what she became. What's particularly horrifying is how ordinary Jaycee's day looked right up until the moment everything collapsed. She picked out her pink clothes. She said goodbye. She walked down the same road she had walked dozens of times. That normalcy is its own kind of violence. It tricks the brain into believing safety exists. And that's why Jaycee's story hits harder than the cautionary tales about kids sneaking into alleys at night. Her tragedy wasn't earned, wasn't flirted with. It just happened. And Jaycee herself, this is the part people forget, wasn't just some passive character in her own nightmare. Even as a child, she was resourceful. In the years to come, she'd raise children of her own in captivity, keep journals, survive things no adult could imagine. There was resilience hidden inside her, waiting. But at 11, walking down that road, all she wanted was to get on the bus and get to school. The world didn't give her that choice. It gave her something else entirely. It happened so fast the human brain can barely process it. 1 second, Jaycee was just a kid walking toward her school bus stop. The next, she was yanked into a gray sedan, like a rag doll swallowed by a machine. The car sped off, gravel spitting behind it, leaving only the sound of tires fading into distance. And right there, standing helpless, was her stepfather, Carl. Carl saw it all unfold from the garage. He saw Jaycee, saw the car, saw the struggle. He jumped on his bike, legs pumping, adrenaline screaming through his veins, chasing a car like his muscles alone could will it to stop. But physics doesn't bend for love. He lost them in seconds. By the time he reached the intersection, they were gone, vanished into cracks of South Lake Tahoe's ordinary streets. Imagine the agony of that moment, to be the adult charged of protecting a child, to see the predator's hands close around her, to hear the slam of a car door and still fail. Carl was haunted by it for decades. The press would later hound him, whispering whether he had something to do with it. Because apparently society loves to twist the knife in people already bleeding. But the truth is simpler and darker. He tried, and it didn't matter. The detail that keeps clawing at me is the stun gun. Witnesses reported hearing a strange zapping sound just as Jaycee was pulled into the vehicle. Her small body convulsed, her scream cut short. That sound, a weapon designed to steal control of muscles and silence protest, was a punctuation mark on her childhood. A man and a woman in that car, predators operating in broad daylight. Didn't even hesitate to use it. That's the part that unravels me. We tell ourselves crimes like this happen in shadows, under bridges, in cities where sirens drown out screams. But Jaycee was stolen with the sun shining, with neighbors awake, with her own stepfather watching. Predators didn't wait for midnight. They struck while the world was blinking. And as that car disappeared down the road, carrying Jaycee toward 18 years of silence, the air in South Lake Tahoe shifted. For the first time, the town understood. The monsters weren't hiding in the forest. They were cruising their streets in sedans, with stun guns in their pockets, ready to snatch away the pink-clad innocence of childhood. The hours after Jaycee's disappearance felt like a fever dream no one could wake from. Police cars patrolled the streets. Helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers spread out to the pine forest with flashlights and dogs. Her photo, freckled cheeks, bright eyes, a child whose biggest crime was existing, was everywhere within days. But the strangest thing happened. The harder people searched, the less sense any of it made. The community whispered theories like gossip. Some swore it had to be Carl, the stepfather who'd conveniently witnessed the abduction. Others muttered about strangers passing through town, drifters, gamblers from across the Nevada border. The story grew heads like a hydra. Maybe she'd been taken into the mountains. Maybe she was trafficked across state lines. Maybe she was buried somewhere close enough for her mother to unknowingly walk above her. Every possibility was as plausible as it was unbearable. Detectives clung to the detail of the gray car with a man and a woman inside. It was unusual, almost cinematic. Who kidnaps children as a couple? That image unsettled everyone. Husband and wife, partners in crime, like some grotesque parody of a family. But leads fizzled. Descriptions of the car contradicted each other. Sketches of the suspects blurred into generic faces that could belong to anyone. 1,000 neighbors, 100 co-workers, every other stranger at the grocery store. Weeks passed, then months, and the narrative began to warp. Instead of whispers about where is Jaycee, the town began murmuring, will she ever be found? The subtle difference between present tense and past tense was a psychological death sentence. The public was already burying her in their minds. What no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that Jaycee hadn't vanished into some faraway nightmare. She was still there, less than 200 miles away, trapped behind the suburban fences of Antioch, California. While her photo aged on bulletin boards, while her mother prayed into the void, Jaycee was in a backyard prison where tents and tarps flapped in the wind, her cries muffled by the hum of air conditioners and the chatter of televisions on the other side of the fence. And here's the most grotesque irony of all. The longer she was missing, the more people assumed she was gone forever. The more they assumed she was gone, the less anyone looked. And the less anyone looked, the safer her captors became. Mystery itself became a shield, cloaking her in invisibility. The investigation into Jaycee's disappearance unfolded like a tragic play where every actor forgot their lines. Police collected the basics: car descriptions, witness statements, Carl's frantic testimony. But nothing stuck. The gray sedan might as well have been a ghost car, vanishing without leaving so much as a tire track. And then came the first fatal flaw. Suspicion turned inward. Instead of chasing the phantom couple who snatched Jaycee, detectives turned the spotlight on Carl, the stepfather who had screamed himself hoarse, insisting he saw the abduction. It's almost insulting how predictable this mistake was. Statistically, authorities always assume the family did it. And yes, often they're right. But when they're wrong, the damage is catastrophic. Carl was grilled, doubted, painted as a man trying to cover his tracks. The very thing that made him a witness. His proximity made him a suspect. Meanwhile, Philip and Nancy Garrido, the predators who actually took Jaycee, went unnoticed, free to build their sick little backyard empire. Theories sprouted like weeds, each one more desperate than the last. Some detectives whispered about cult involvement, thanks to the man and woman detail that felt ritualistic in its strangeness. Others spun darker ideas: cross-border trafficking rings, bodies dumped in Lake Tahoe, scenarios too gruesome for the public to stomach. Search parties drained ponds, sifted through forest brush, followed tips from psychics who claimed to see visions of Jaycee in chains. And yet, the most damning clue was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Philip Garrido himself. He was already a registered offender. He was already on parole. He already had a history of abductions, drugs, and violence. He was supposed to be monitored by parole officers, supposed to be checked on regularly. But parole is only as strong as a human's tasked with enforcing it. And in Garrido's case, oversight was sloppy. He lived in Antioch with his wife Nancy, maintaining the outward appearance of a reclusive oddball, while behind his house sat the true crime scene: tents, sheds, and eventually 2 children born in captivity. The Garridos even slipped past police not once, not twice, but multiple times over the years. Officers visited the property for unrelated calls. Neighbors complained about children they heard in the backyard, even though Garrido wasn't supposed to have kids around him at all. And still, nothing. Each missed opportunity was a wound, bleeding hope from Jaycee's case. By the mid-1990s, the official files on Jaycee Dugard were collecting dust. Cold case status was creeping in. And yet, the truth was alive, pacing back and forth in a backyard prison less than 2 hours away. The breaking point didn't come from polished detectives or cutting-edge forensics. It came from cracks in Philip Garrido's own delusion. By the late 2000s, Garrido had developed a kind of twisted religious obsession, convinced he was chosen to deliver some grand spiritual message. He would spend hours handing out pamphlets about his special powers, cornering strangers with his rambling sermons. It was arrogance disguised as revelation, and it would eventually expose him. In August 2009, Garrido did something unthinkable for a man, keeping a kidnapped woman hidden in his backyard. He marched into the UC Berkeley police office with 2 young girls. They were Jaycee's daughters, born during her captivity. He introduced them as his nieces. The girls were pale, shy, oddly submissive, like moths who had never seen sunlight. Campus police officers felt something was off. Their instincts twitched. These kids didn't look like nieces. They looked like ghosts. They called in a parole officer. Suddenly, the system that had failed Jaycee for 18 years was about to stumble into redemption by accident. Garrido, rambling as ever, invited authorities to his house to hear more about his God-given mission. He was so wrapped up in his Messiah complex that he didn't notice the thin ice cracking beneath him. When officers arrived in Antioch and began poking around, they finally saw the backyard for what it was: sheds, tarps, tents, a labyrinth of makeshift structures where Jaycee had been held since she was a child. And then, there she was, a woman, 29 years old, timid, nervous, hesitant to even reveal her name, she whispered the words like they were foreign on her tongue. "I'm Jaycee." Think about that. 18 years erased in a breath. A missing child poster suddenly standing in front of you, aged and alive. It was a revelation, so shocking it didn't feel real. The girl everyone assumed was long gone had been alive this entire time, hidden in plain sight, raising 2 children of her own while the world spun on without her. The turning point wasn't just that Jaycee was found. It was a collapse of an illusion, that authority always knows best, that predators can't hide in daylight, that neighbors really hear what they think they hear. The breakdown wasn't Jaycee's. It was ours. When the truth finally clawed its way into daylight, it should have been clean: rescue, justice, closure. But reality doesn't work like that. Jaycee Dugard had been found alive. Yes, but what exactly does alive mean after 18 years stolen? She was 29 years old, a woman who had entered captivity as a child and emerged with 2 children of her own. She'd missed high school, first loves, dances, college applications. Entire lifetimes of small, ordinary moments gone, replaced with years of manipulation, fear, and survival. Philip and Nancy Garrido were arrested in 2009, and the evidence was overwhelming. The backyard compound, the diaries, the children. For once, the legal system didn't fumble. In 2011, Philip was sentenced to 431 years to life. Nancy, his accomplice, received 36 years to life. Numbers so vast they almost sound like cosmic jokes, as if the court was trying to quantify the unquantifiable. The theft of nearly 2 decades from a human being. But the questions left behind were like splinters no one could dig out. How did parole officers miss her? How did neighbors ignore the sounds of children in a house where no children were supposed to exist? How many times did Jaycee come within feet of rescue, only to have bureaucracy, incompetence, or disbelief push her back into silence? One report revealed that officers had actually visited Garrido's home multiple times over the years. They saw the tents, the tarps, the backyard that looked like a survivalist fever dream, and walked away. One officer even spoke with Garrido face-to-face while Jaycee and her daughters were hidden in the backyard. The sheer scale of those missed opportunities is maddening, like watching someone flip past a winning lottery number over and over without realizing it. And then there's a psychological mystery. How did Jaycee survive? Not just physically, but mentally. In her memoir later, she wrote about naming kittens, about clinging to the tiny joys she could scavenge, about protecting her daughters as fiercely as possible inside a prison made of tarps. She adapted, because what else was there to do? Survival wasn't a choice. It was the only option. The resolution feels both triumphant and cruel. Jaycee was found. Her captors were punished. Yet the story ends not with bow, but with jagged edges. Lingering questions, missed warnings, and the echo of 18 years no one can ever give back. The world wanted a happy ending, a triumphant return, the kind of story that lets us all sleep easier at night. But Jaycee's aftermath didn't fit into tidy fairy tales. How could it? She stepped out of captivity as a 29-year-old with the internal timeline of an 11-year-old. She had 2 daughters to raise. Children who were born into a prison, who didn't even know what the word normal meant until officers led them out from behind the fences. She had to rebuild herself from fragments: child, mother, survivor, stranger. Her mother, Terry, collapsed when she got the call. For 18 years, she had lived in the half-life of a grieving parent, never sure if her daughter was alive or gone, stuck in the purgatory of anniversaries and unanswered prayers. Reunited, the 2 clung to each other like shipwreck survivors pulled from the same ocean, bonded not by time shared but by time lost. The legal system squirmed under the weight of the case. Investigations exposed a grotesque chain of failures. Parole officers who missed red flags, neighbors whose suspicions went ignored, bureaucrats who filed away reports like they were junk mail. Committees were formed, hearings held, stern words spoken. Policies around monitoring high-risk offenders were tightened, at least on paper. Jaycee's survival became both a miracle and an indictment. Culturally, her story carved itself into the American psyche. She joined the tragic pantheon of names like Elizabeth Smart and Sean Hornbeck. Children who vanished, presumed gone forever, only to reemerge years later. Except Jaycee's case carried a crueler twist. She hadn't been in some faraway land. She was right there, hidden in a backyard suburbia, didn't want to look too closely at. And then there's Jaycee herself. Against every odd, she refused to vanish into victimhood. She wrote a memoir, A Stolen Life, not as some polished literary act, but as a raw, almost childlike exorcism of memory. She built a foundation to help other survivors. She turned her pain outward into something useful. The legacy isn't just her endurance. It's her defiance of being defined solely by what was done to her. But make no mistake, the shadow of her captivity lingers over every reform, every conversation, every attempt to celebrate survival. It's a reminder we don't want but can't escape. The reminder that safety is an illusion and monsters sometimes live in a house next door. 18 years. That number gnaws at the imagination. Long enough for a newborn to grow into an adult. Long enough for fashions to die and be reborn. Long enough for technology to leap from cassette tapes to iPhones. And Jaycee Dugard lived all of that in a backyard dungeon built from tarps and plywood. The world moved on, but her clock barely ticked. What keeps me awake is not just the crime, it's the way reality bent around it. Neighbors swore they heard children. Officers walked through the property. Teachers kept her face on missing posters long after the ink began to fade. The clues weren't subtle. They were screaming, shrieking, waving flares. But no one connected them. Because deep down, people don't want to believe horrors are happening within arm's reach. It's easier to imagine evil as distant, exotic, cinematic. Jaycee's story annihilates that comfort. And yet, her existence today is also a rebuke to despair. She survived. She raised her daughters. She wrote her truth. She carved a life out of the wreckage. Not many people could do that. It's almost mythic in its resilience. If you read her memoir, there's this undercurrent of wonder, like she's still half surprised she made it through. The monsters wanted her erased, but instead she became a symbol, proof that the human spirit can drag itself through hell and still stagger into the sunlight. Still, every time we call a miracle, we let the system off the hook. A miracle implies something divine swooped in at the last second. But the truth is colder. Jaycee survived because she adapted. She endured because no one came. And she was rescued not by divine fate, but because her captor's ego finally cracked wide open. The haunting moral of Jaycee Dugard's case is this: survival is not proof that justice works. It's proof that humans can carry more pain than we want to admit. And every time a neighbor dismisses a sound in the night, every time a parole officer shrugs off a report, every time society turns its gaze away because the truth feels too ugly, we risk creating another Jaycee. Her story forces us to stare into that ugliness and ask the most uncomfortable question of all: how many others are still out there, waiting to be seen? Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.